You asked, we answered. That's right. We got a mailbag episode for you today, and we got a new intro song as well. Let's get to it. How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Angle Fantasy Basketball Podcast. My name is Andrew. If you want to check out all of the content that we make, be sure to visit anglefantasybasketball.wordpress.com. You can follow us on Twitter at anglefantasybb. We are available on Spotify and Apple Music, as well as YouTube for all of our podcasts. And then on YouTube, we also do player videos and vlogs as well. So be sure to check that out. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. Like this video, thumb it up, leave a comment down below. So let's get into it. We have a mailbag episode today. We have questions that were submitted to us from the members of the Angle Dynasty Basketball server on Discord, and we're going to answer those today. So it's not just me here at Angle. There are three of us here at Angle. Let's introduce the other two that are here with me today. Mitchell, you're going to be taking it first today. You got some good questions for you. How are you doing? And are you excited about this mailbag?
Yeah, man, of course. It's our second iteration of this mailbag, and we've got a lot of really good questions here that I'm excited to answer. And, just overall, on a Monday talking hoops, nothing better than that to start the week.
Exactly. We wanted to get this video out a bit earlier last week, but unfortunately I was battling the flu all of last week, so we had to postpone this one. But we got a double upload for you guys this week, though. So we got two good podcasts coming on, and the person who's going to be on both of those podcasts with me is going to be Braxton. How are you today, sir?
Good, man. We're on the home stretch here. It's almost basketball season again.
That's
So,
right. That's right.
things are getting exciting.
I know. Unfortunately, you and I both were recently eliminated from our Dynasty Baseball League. So it's time for us
Yes,
to start gearing towards basketball now, huh?
exactly. That lets me know it's time to check out and then check back in to basketball. So,
Well, the only thing that we do need to pay attention to, because I'm gonna work harder and harder to get you more on board, is Dodger baseball. We got playoffs coming up, and I have a strong feeling that I'm really starting to convert you into being a Dodgers fan.
they're fun. We've talked about it a bunch. I've got a bunch of their players on my fantasy team, so it's hard. It's like almost like I'm fake rooting for them because I don't really care if they win or not, but like I want the players to do good. So, maybe I'm turning into a little bit of a fan. We'll see.
All right, very good. I mean, it's fun. Just like we play Deep League Dynasty Basketball, Brax and I also participate in Deep League Dynasty Baseball. So if Angle were to ever cover a second sport, it would definitely be baseball. But today we're here to talk about what we do best, and that's basketball. So let's get us started off with our first question. This one's for you, Mitchell. So this is coming from our friend from Canada, Slice O Irish. He is part of the Angle Dynasty League. He is the Toronto Raptors in that league. So we got a two-parter here. So I'll give you the first part before we get into the second one, Mitch. The first question is, what place in a Dynasty fantasy season would prompt you to proceed with tanking the following year?
So yeah, this is a great question. Very great question, because a lot of teams in real life kind of struggle with this pendulum. Do they go towards that tanking route, or do they really go all in and contend? I want to say this strategy parallels with real life NBA teams, but in terms of fantasy, it's probably accelerated a year or two earlier. And unlike NBA teams in Dynasty Fantasy Basketball, there aren't those external pressures to fill stadiums and sell tickets, and that pressure to really have a playoff team to extend their season. And no matter the league size, in my opinion, if you are a middling team or barely making the playoffs, this is a great sign for you to proceed with tanking the following year, because there's nothing worse than to be stuck in the middle of the nowhere with real no direction. And I really recommend either really embracing the tank or fully committing towards contention, because if you're kind of stuck in the middle in your first round exit, you don't get the benefit of receiving a top tier pick, but you don't earn any monetary value. And that's part of the reason why we play fantasy basketball, is to earn some money. And I want to say the same thing can be said if you're just simply not ready to compete within the next year. I mean, I'm just stating the obvious. So it never hurts if you're so far out of contention to tank a year and to receive a blue chip asset that's really highly desirable. And in these coming two drafts, we have Cooper Flag, Dylan Harper, AJ DeBanza, Cam Boozer. So these next 2 years are some perfect years for some tanking, for a tanking process.
Absolutely. And one thing I'll add to that too. So this isn't really going more so with like, what place you got in the previous season, but there's just something to be said about the flexibility that you have if you still retain all of your first round picks. So especially if you're built around, perhaps an injury prone player or some young guys where you're not 100% sure if they're going to hit or not, you want to have your first to maintain flexibility. And so where I'm going with this is like, if you're ever in a league, especially if it's 20 teams or deeper, you own your first round pick still for the future, and you suffer a catastrophic injury to one of your major stars, that should be an absolute starting point to nosedive your team into the ground and get a good pick for the next year. We just saw this happen in real life with the Memphis Grizzlies. 2 years from being a 2 seed in the West, suffered catastrophic injuries to Ja Morant, as well as a lot of just the primary Grizzlies players, tanked as much as they could last season. We saw the most NBA players feature ever for one team last season in the Memphis Grizzlies. They're bringing in pretty much anybody that they could off the street to play for them. And
I think,
that
Andrew,
turned
I
into
think
them
they
landing.
also had, oh, sorry. I think they also had 20 different starting lineups, 25 plus different starting lineups that the Memphis Grizzlies had. So to your point, it's really hard to predict. And also having that first round pick really gives you all that freedom in the world to decide the direction of your team.
Right. And so Memphis turned that into, despite being normally a very good team when healthy, they turned that into landing a multi-time college basketball player of the year in this last draft with Zach Edey. So this type of thing is possible. We've seen it happen multiple times. Shout out to our friend Zed from the Philippines in one of the original leagues that we were in. He was a champion one year, suffered some big injuries to Zion Williamson and a couple other guys, tanked. I believe he got Jalen Duren out of that and then was right back into the mix the following year. So that's absolutely something that could happen. So to your point, Mitch, of, you don't want to be one of those middling teams, but also if it's gotten, if it's still fairly early on in your season, you suffer a big injury and you got control of your first, go ahead and start taking that team, start gearing up for next year and being even better, as opposed to just trying to struggle along with, having an incomplete roster. So that brings us.
I want to add one more thing real quick. You guys know me. I don't really tank pretty much in any situation. And I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach to this. And I think I think the deeper the league, the more effective tanking can be. I think if you're in a shallower league, like 12, 10, or even 8, it's almost pointless to tank, in my opinion, unless you're finishing like 10th or 11th in a 12 team while trying, right? At that point, the talent disparity between the first pick and the 12th pick, which is the champion, it to me is not deep enough to warrant just throwing years away. If you're in a deeper league, like 16, 20, 24, 30, like we are in a bunch of, it's much more effective where it's that much more difficult to get those elite assets. And I think in the shallower league where the teams are stacked just, to the brim already, at least compared to some of the deeper leagues, and there's more talent to go around, I think tanking is actually less effective. And I'm going to disagree with what you guys said. I think if you are a middling team in like a 12 or a 10 and you're one piece away, or maybe you're just some injury luck away from making the playoffs, I don't like tanking in that scenario. I think if you can make and this is just me personally, if you can make the playoffs in any given season in a league that's that shallow, right? Where again, there's not the talent discrepancy between the first team and the 16th or the 30th team, right? If you can make the playoffs in a league that shallow, it's worth it every time to me over tanking. So shallower leagues, for me personally, there's no reason ever to tank unless your team is just awful and you have zero direction. You have nothing you like on your team. All your players are tired or something like that.
Yeah,
but
Brax,
yeah, I just wanted to add that.
I really tend to agree there on shallow leagues, and sometimes I have my 30 team blinders on. I really forgot the consideration that the majority of new dynasty players are playing those shallower 10 to 12 team leagues where that discrepancy isn't very wide. Like looking at 2021, the top 3 picks in most drafts were Cade, Mobley, and Jalen Green. The guys that went 6, 7, 8, Scotty Barnes, Franz Wagner, Alper and Şengün, they pretty much overlap those 3 guys. I mean, it really is a wash in those shallower leagues, and I do tend to agree there. But we do have those 30 team blinders on. Playing in salary leagues where those rookie contracts are a lot more lucrative. So to your
Definitely.
point, I do agree.
Okay, so let's move on to the second part of Slice's question here. So Mitch, what value would you accept if you had Victor Wembanyama and were moving him? What's the value that you're going to need to see in order to move Wemby?
Yeah, so before we dive into this question, I want to kind of say that Wemby is almost untradeable in all dynasty circles. And let's review his rookie year stats. Wemby as a rookie averaged 21.4 points, 10.6 rebounds, 3.9 assists, 1.2 steals, and 3.6 blocks as a teenager, right? So you can only imagine the amount of talent that he has going into his prime and what those numbers can look like. We're looking at like prime Hakeem Olajuwon numbers with some threes, maybe less field goal, but similar type of block rate and pretty much all around contributor. So after his rookie season, personally, I'm in 6 different dynasty leagues. I've only seen Wemby traded once, and this was in a 30-team non-salary where actually our champion of that league, Charles, he traded Wemby for Trae Young, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Jaylen Brown. So I want to give a note. A trade of this magnitude is pretty much almost impossible in salary leagues to pull off because of Wemby's salary match. So this is the type of trade that you'd really have to receive if you were to consider moving him in non-salary leagues. So in salary leagues, this is almost impossible to pull off unless your main piece is like Chet Holmgren and some other blue chip talents.
Well, you did
You
it
would
with
almost
Halliburton.
I did, but this was before we knew Wemby's potential. We
True.
didn't know he was gonna, you know, I mean, going back, yes, I traded Tyrese Halliburton, Keegan Murray for Wemby, Jordan Hawkins, and Jalen Hood-Schifino. And at the time, I was roasted. We put this on our Twitter poll, and I believe the Halliburton side won 65 to 35 in terms of a percentage ratio. So, you really have to overpay in the public perception to really obtain Wembanyama at this point. And from a seller's point, what I was trying to finish off is you can't even trade him really in a salary league because you're getting the best production per cost type player and such a great salary over the next 3 years. So you would really have to gut your entire roster for this type of generational talent. I mean, would you guys have to agree to this point after what we've seen Charles trade for him in a non-salary?
I'll say, at least for me, I know we all have him 1 and then somebody else at 2. Like, I think our 1 through 5 is all separate, right? But the gap between him at the 1 and then Jokic or Doncic or whatever it is at 2 is pretty significant, right? You factor in the age and then the categorical scarcity that he boosts with his blocks and all in the out of position assists and everything like that. It really would take something like Doncic plus another top 15, top 20 guy, at least for me, to be worth it. He's somebody that can win blocks for you by yourself in a category league. And that alone is worth more, just scarcity wise than what Jokic can bring, what Doncic can bring. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not discrediting the value of Jokic or Doncic. Obviously, those guys are still top 3 assets, right? But for Wemby specifically, and especially when you factor in team composition and all kinds of external factors like that, it would just require something ridiculous to get him. So completely agree with what you're saying.
All right. Okay, so our next question comes from Feka Lexi. So they ask, how many players who currently don't produce much or at all, but have potential should be stashed at the end of an active roster? Is this answer different for rebuilding, retooling, and contending teams? Can contenders afford to stash? Feka, that's a great question. So there's a few parts to it. Let me break this down. So the first thing that we need to talk about is how majority of dynasty play, I believe your question is referring to dynasty. Majority of dynasty play happens on either sleeper or fan tracks. So both of these platforms offer an ability to stash what we refer to as minors eligible players. So in Sleeper, it is referred to as the taxi squad, and then on Fantrax, it is referred to as the minor spot. So typically what that is a young player who's played less than 82 games. You're able to stash them in that spot. However, they don't have any stats accumulate for you. So generally, Dynasty platforms do offer an ability for somebody to stash guys for the future who they don't plan on using for their current season. However, the answer is different if for some other types of teams, especially if you're in a platform that doesn't allow the taxi squad or the minors build, or the minor spots, I should say. So for a fully rebuilding team, you can stash quite a lot of different current players who don't actively produce at this moment, but have potential, especially because if you're rebuilding and you're in a full-blown tank, you're going to want those guys who don't put up stats right now. You want to put up the worst possible stat lines in order to, in order to tank efficiently, put up as little of production as possible, and earn yourself, top 3 draft odds to try to secure, let's say, a number 1 pick. So, for this upcoming draft class, trying to secure Cooper Flag, for example. So it's totally fine for a rebuilding team to have anywhere between, 6 to 7 or so guys who are not producing right now, but could produce in the future, just because that's generally what rebuilding teams do. Like, for example, let's say you're a team that has Luka Doncic. Maybe you also have, Kobe White on there, and not much else after that. Maybe one other, kind of okay guy. So what you want to do is the guys who you have who are valuable that do play, you want to make sure that they do not ever get into your starting lineup and put up any type of stats for you, because that's going to affect your ability to properly tank. So for rebuilding teams, having a good amount of guys who don't produce but have potential to be useful in the future is actually a good strategy to do. And one thing that is common amongst tankers is they will put their promising blue chip prospects in the minor squad or taxi spots so that they don't accumulate stats for them. And then the guys who are less of blue chips prospects but have potential in the future but aren't producing right away, like for example Peyton Watson in the beginning of his career, they will put them on the active roster because they will obviously trust that these guys will be better serving towards their tank. So that's one common strategy. But for a retooling or contending team, so this is really going to be specific, or dependent, I should say, on league size. So for contending teams, if you're in a 12-team league, normally these types of leagues will have, let's say, like 10 active players and then huge benches, like 12 spots on your bench or something like that. And if that's the case, you can have, maybe around 4 guys who currently aren't producing that much right now that you could stash onto there, because you want to at least have a stable rotation of guys who produce if you are a contending team. But yes, contenders can afford to stash. I mean, if you're in a 30-team league, which typically only rosters about 12 guys per team, then I would say at the absolute most, you can only afford to stash 1 guy if you're a contender. A retooling team might be able to do a little bit better than that, especially if you're in, like, let's say just a 1-year rebuild, then maybe stashing about 2 or 3 of those guys on your roster to, potentially help yourself tank towards a better draft pick, as well as be more looking towards the future for, let's say, a shorter retooling process. So that's retooling generally refers to like a 1 to 2 year rebuild. Then you can have about, let's say like 3. So contenders about 1, especially if it's a deeper league, but the larger size leagues, you can have maybe upwards of 4. Retooling teams can have in a deeper league around 3 guys that they can stash on there. And a rebuilding team could have, upwards of like 4 or 5 of them on there too. So that's generally the difference between those 3 types of scenarios for yourself in a dynasty league, when we're talking about players who currently don't produce right now but have potential to produce in the future. So like I mentioned earlier, a prime example of a player that fits that mold would be Peyton Watson when he was coming up through the Nuggets system.
Andrew, can I add something really quick? You kind of just gave me some flashbacks when tanking with Luka Doncic. So one thing I want to say about blockers that you mentioned, this is a little pro tip that we have. If you have someone like Luka Doncic and you want to block him and you want to tie these Luka's games with another player, find someone on the Dallas Mavericks that has guard eligibility, 2 guards preferably at the back end of their roster, to block Luka so you don't contribute any stats at any given point when the Mavericks play. So this is something that I did on my final year of tanking in 1 year with Luca. I think I slotted AJ Johnson or AJ
Lawson.
Lawson. Yeah, AJ Lawson. And I think there was Frank Ntilikina at the time. So I would just have these two play the entire year over Luka Doncic and secure me top 2 odds. I did fall, but that is one strategy that I definitely recommend if you have contention or if you have tanking solely on your mind, find those positional blockers for your star player.
That's going to take us to our next question. This will be for you, Brax. What is the best way to do a slow auction draft when you have owners who are all over the world? So this is coming from Chuck Ball.
Yeah, it's, I mean, I think there really is only one way to do it, right? You've got to set, granted, I haven't done a slow auction on Fantrax. I don't know if Fantrax supports it, but ideally you want to have multiple players up for bid at any given time with a 24-hour clock on those players. So maybe something like 10 players up at once and have a 24-hour clock. And I'm in a league that does custom salary that did a slow auction for players all over for owners all over the world. And this is how they kind of did it. If somebody bids on them, that 24-hour clock resets. And then if somebody gets bid on and then there's no further bids after 24 hours, then that player has been sold and goes to the appropriate team. Now, whether or not Fantrax supports that, I'm not entirely sure. I know there are some other platforms that potentially you get, like Andrew, I think we talked a little bit offline about this, but maybe some kind of offline draft where you hold it on either manually, I guess, depending on how many players you have in the league, or on a platform where you could do something like this and then just import the teams that way. But yeah, you definitely want to have 24-hour clock. Definitely want to have 10, 15 guys up for bid at any given moment. Because otherwise it just takes too long.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know for your custom salary league, you guys had a whiz kid bring up some type of an app which allowed you to do that. So I know not everybody's obviously going to have that type of option, creating their own app to get that process done. But yeah, I would say offline is probably your best chance at getting that done, especially if you're working with time zones from all over the world.
Yeah, that was Airmart. So just want to shout out Airmart for developing the tool that we used.
Very good. All right, so let's bring it to a question from our boy Harry Forks. All right, so in a dynasty league, how much should we prioritize youth? How much of a balance between contending players and young upcoming players should we have? Harry Forks, that is an excellent question, and this is a subject that I like to talk about a lot. So as we were talking about earlier in this episode, there's a right way and a wrong way to do tanking. And what I caution people with is that when you are going into a full-blown tank, so not just a one-year rebuild, but a full-blown tank, you want to have an exit strategy of this is how many years I'm going to give it before I start maybe trading some of my, lesser wanted young guys for competitive players to mix in with everybody else and make a competitive team. The one thing I want everybody to avoid is what I refer to as the rookie treadmill. So what people do is they will create a roster of just all super young players trying to be completely forward future focused. They're looking to tank as much as they can, and they're looking to accumulate taking assets, so future draft picks, as well as guys who are going to be good stashes who can develop into something later. But what people often make the mistake of doing is they will get too fixated on the youth aspect. So they'll have a team full of young guys, and then as soon as some of these guys who you originally started your tank with start reaching, age 24, 25, 26, they'll all of a sudden trade them away for more draft picks to continue to tank further and build the team. So that's why I call it a treadmill, because you're just running in the same place. You're stuck in the same place of continuously gathering youth assets, keeping your team bad and continuing to tank, and just cycling out any person who gets to an age that you no longer like. It's something that I want people to avoid. There should be a balance of contending players and young upcoming players. In addition to that, Your team doesn't need to be all 24 years and younger just to properly tank. Somebody who's 28 years old can for sure survive a 1-year tank, or I should say a 1-year rebuild, or perhaps even a 2-year tank. That's absolutely possible. That people need to stop discrediting someone as being too old if they're somewhere between the age of 25 to 28. That always drives me crazy, people calling them old or expecting some type of decline out of them, when that's when the athletic prime window is. The athletic prime window, especially in basketball, is like 26 to 31-ish, something around there. So when you're bailing out on guys right before they hit their prime, that's what's going to keep you stuck in the same place. So there should be a balance of two things, because of course, we also want to avoid the opposite. We don't want a team full of, 30-year-olds and up, maybe, similar to our boy Justin's team in the court, just having a bunch of old guys on there. We don't want that either. We want to have a good mix where, what I typically do on my team is instead of stockpiling a lot of youth, I want to stockpile at least 2 to 3, what I refer to as pillars. So these are going to be young guys where even when my current producing veterans, once they age out, these 3 young guys that are on my team are still going to be there, and I'll continue to build the team around them. So I want to have at least 3 of those guys who are producing right now and are young, and then I will surround them by veteran talent. That's how you create a balanced dynasty roster to help you out in contending, as well as give you potential flexibility to tank if you do suffer a big injury, or if you're not producing well enough and you keep ending up in that middle range. Because in most dynasty leagues, you're not going to earn any type of money until you get to the second round of playoffs. That's usually what happens. So if you're always a first round exit, that's something you want to avoid. And so we want to have that balance between contending players and youth players. So don't be too old. Have at least 3 guys who are young and produce for you, as opposed to being, just stash guys.
Andrew, and I'm sure, or excuse me, I just want to add real quick, something else you want to be doing as a tanking team is trading for injured players at a discount, right?
Yes.
You see a top guy like Zach LaVine go down last year. That's when you swoop in as a tanking team and get this good play. Yes, what is he now, 30 or something? Yeah, sure, he's 30, but he's hurt. He's not going to affect your tank this year, and he's gonna be right there for you the next season, healthy and ready to contribute, and you got him a discount. That is how you build a winning roster from tanking.
Absolutely. The moment you see a contending team have a big player go down, you could be the one to bail them out and get tanking assets in addition to that. So maybe you'll move, one of your guys who's active for a hurt player as well as an additional first round pick. Zach LaVine from last year is an excellent example. I'm sure, another example from last year could be Ja Morant too. Maybe you had, you traded away a future lottery pick from this year's draft as well as a little bit extra to secure Ja Morant, which I would take any day of the week, even when Ja Morant was hurt. I would absolutely much rather have him than even, Reed Shepherd plus a little bit more, or a pick that ended up becoming Reed Shepherd. So there's absolutely ways to take advantage as a team who's looking to rebuild. All right. So moving us on to our next pick, and this is kind of next question, and this is kind of branching off of the question we just did. So this is from our boy Hawaii 96707, most likely the highest maximum bench press throughout our entire Discord server. All right, so Hawaii's question, this one's for you, Mitch. He's asking, what's something lots of dynasty players get wrong? For example, undervaluing old producers and overvaluing youth and picks.
Yeah, another one that, is a really great question. So I'm going to take a different route and talk about something different based off the last question. So one, I'm looking at the draft. So this question is a strategy on buying rookies in particular. I want to give that warning that buying rookie draft picks during a live draft instead of the mid-season after rookies have been drafted is probably the worst mistake that you can get wrong, right? Everyone wants the new shiny toy, and this is due to FOMO, fear of missing out. And it's really the peak value of rookies. Everyone wants to watch a rookie play in summer league. They want to see their boys when, there's no basketball going on for, the entirety of summer. So they have that 2-week window to really get hyped about some of these new prospects. Everyone wants to draft their guy. Everyone's excited. But the best time to buy a rookie is really during the early to mid part of the season when they aren't producing at the rate that they expect them to. I want to say a lot of people in particular are very impatient in the dynasty space. You want to think that you're patient, but I'm going to tell you what, almost 90% of people in fantasy basketball are very impatient. So target these teams who have top 10 or lottery picks that aren't contributing and they don't have the time to wait on them. So the buy low opportunity will definitely be there. However, I do want to say that this won't work for teams who are pretty much set into the tanking mindset and are likely to sit on their rookies all year. So when buying these rookie picks in a buy low scenario, target those top playoff teams that need constant contributors that are really frustrated on the lack of production of rookies. So this happens all the time every year. For example, someone like Jarace Walker, he was a top 7 pick of this last draft in 2023. He's not producing. He's a great buy low candidate, especially near the All-Star break. Another one is Taylor Hendricks, both guys who went in the top 10 and were seen as potential top 75, top 100 assets before the year. You can now buy them at the rate of a top 150 asset. So you just kind of have to poach off these impatient fantasy owner or dynasty owners.
One thing I'll add to that as another common mistake that dynasty players can make is joining a bad league. So there's a lot of research you should make before the decision of just jumping into a dynasty league. Because, one of our main goals in dynasty basketball is to make money. And so we don't want to put, $50, $100, $150 over 3 years into a league that we don't win any money in it. And then we end up abandoning our team in that league. So there's a lot of consideration that needs to go into what kind of league you want to join. You need to look at the commissioner landscape. Do you have an active and communicative commissioner? Do you have a good server with active league members? Like if you're trying to trade and there's only, 3 guys who are always down to trade, even though it's a 12-team league or something like that, and all 3 of them are low ballers all the time, something like that. That's obviously a bad situation to be in. That's not something that people particularly enjoy. And sometimes people too, they will focus so much on stockpiling assets, accumulating youth. And, a lot of people just go into dynasty leagues thinking they have some type of like 10-year plan, whereas it's very rare for dynasty leagues to last, longer than 4 or 5 years, something like that. Only the really best of ones do. Something like, for example, the Angle Dynasty League is absolutely going to last forever and never die. But there are plenty of leagues out there that are, they constantly have vacant spots. If you're constantly seeing vacant spots and maybe there's a dispersal draft, take close looks at the dispersal draft. If you see some names in there that are like, how the hell did this person roster this guy for, all of last year? Like, for example, there was a dispersal draft that we saw where I saw names like Isaiah Roby as a part of the dispersal draft. It's like, who the hell was allowing somebody to roster Isaiah Roby for all of last year? I don't think he's anywhere near the NBA right now. So, take close consideration into what you're getting yourself into before you join a league. So the last thing you want to do is join a bad dynasty league that you're going to end up spending money on and then leaving without ever, making any of your money back. All right. So this is going to take us to our next 2-parter question. So this is for you, Rex. This is from RB Sauce Zambonis. So part 1 of his question: who are some of your way too early picks for silly season heroes? So by silly season, we're referring to, late March, early April, prior to the playoffs, when a lot of tanking teams are going to be playing just the most random guys, as well as winning teams such as the Celtics last year are going to bench their stars for, the role players off the bench to get some run instead.
Yeah, and I'm so glad I got this one. I've got a few lined up here for you. First, I've got a duo from Brooklyn. I mean, we all know how Brooklyn is going to be looking this season, and it's probably not going to be very good. Cam Thomas is going to be a tank commander. He's probably going to put up a career season. But they've got some role players in Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith that are pretty firmly on the trade block after the Mikal Bridges trade. Some guys that I expect to, take a leap, either when those guys get traded or late in the season when those two, if they somehow are still on the team, probably aren't going to be playing as much, is Jalen Wilson. We all know how good he can be. We saw him shine various points last season. And then I know you guys don't like this one, but Trendon Watford is a big one for me. The Nets signed him to a qualifying offer. I believe he is one of 2 players in the NBA right now with a no trade clause. Now that's not a big deal, right? But I just think that's notable. And Trendon Watford down the stretch last year played like 28 minutes a game, and he averaged like 12, 7, and 3. He's a bit of a point forward. We've seen him do this in Portland before, and we talked about this during our rankings podcast as well, where I pitched Trendon Watford to everybody. But he has the capability to put up stats across the board, and the Nets seem to like him, and they're going to give him run if there's room for him. Jalen Wilson also is more of a points and boards guy. I like to see a little bit more out of him. But those 2 are somebody you really need to keep an eye on, and are an elite stash that you can acquire for very little in Dynasty leagues right now. Another one is Jonathan Mobo in Toronto. Now, if Toronto's season takes a downswing, Mobo is somebody that I think can step up and really produce. He showed coming into the draft that he can do the big man stats. Obviously, he's a little bit undersized, but 14 points, 10 boards. And I think it was something like 1.6 blocks and like 60% from the field. That's pretty solid. But what's really interesting to me is 3.6 assists that he averaged last year. The reports are that he can handle the ball a little bit, and he's kind of molding his game after Scotty Barnes. We know that they're really good friends, but I've seen some whispers that some people he reminds some people of what Barnes was coming into the league, and that's something that's really interesting to me. And if they just kind of unleash him, we know how much Masai loves these lengthy guys. I think there's a lot of potential there for him to put up some really nice stat lines. And then lastly, it's going to be Keyshawn George in Washington. This one is pretty simple. Yeah, it's just really simple. I mean, we know Washington is going to be terrible. They just traded Danny Avdia. Malcolm Brogdon is not really going to be a factor on this team. He'll play, sure, yeah, but not late in the season. Corey Kispert might get traded. I think there's a lot of and the upside on Keyshawn George is not as high as the other ones that I mentioned, in my opinion, just because he's mainly a points and threes guy. I'd like to see a little bit more out of him from his peripheral stats. But I think there's going to be a huge opportunity for him. I think he plays a lot early on, but I think late season is when we might see him get unleashed, if at all.
I'm just glad you did not mention Killian Hayes.
Oh. Go ahead.
Quick comment, Brax. Any love for redemption or a 2-time silly season Charlotte Hornet Grant Williams, who posted 15, 5, and 5?
He's not a silly season guy. He's going to be contributing all season. Now, I don't think he's going to be point forward Grant Williams, but he'll be in the rotation and possibly might start. But he's not really a silly season guy to me. I think the Hornets are a sleeper for the playoffs this year. So.
Wow. Okay. We heard it here first.
That's not really that hot of a take. I mean, there's plenty of people saying the Hornets can make the playoffs. They're so deep now. And if everybody's healthy, they're a good team. That's not some crazy take that I'm making.
No, it's really not. It really ultimately depends on LaMelo's ankles, and they'll only go as far as he goes.
Exactly.
So when we asked that question, or when that question, I would say, was brought up in the mailbag, somebody kind of just answered and immediately pointed out Donovan Clingan. So one thing I want to ask, do we think Portland's going to suck that bad again this year? Or is there a chance where they might be good enough to where there's not really too much of a silly season in Portland?
Man, Portland is definitely going to suck. I mean, there are already whispers of Anthony Simons getting traded. They need a pathway for Scoot to be the starting point guard of the future. DeAndre Ayton has been whispered to be on the trade block as well. Time Lord, his ankles or his knees are always an issue. He has like degenerative knee disorder similar to Kawhi. Portland is definitely going to tank, in my opinion. They want to build around Scoot. They have their guy. They just need one more blue chip. Jeremy Grant is always sitting out every year. He's similar to Lauri Markkanen. He plays like one game in March and calls it a year pretty much. So to your point, I do think Portland is going to tank again. I think they need one more guy.
Who's got a better job than Jeremy Grant? I mean, he almost always starts on every team that he's been on lately. He usually stops playing in March, and he makes a shitload of money.
That's what he wants. He wants to be the first option, and he wants to make all the money. He doesn't care if he wins.
And he gets to play a month less than everybody else. He gets to go to Cabo a little early. So shout out to Jeremy Grant. All right, so let's go to the part 2 of RB Sauce's question here, Brax. Who is the player that, if they were traded or injured, it would create the greatest opportunity for a high upside teammate?
Yeah, I'll start. And we saw a little bit of this one last year with Zach LaVine, but I think it's gonna be Zach LaVine again. We saw what Ayo and Kobe White did last season without LaVine. I think they're both going to take a little bit of a hit when LaVine is healthy this year, as well as Josh Giddey coming in taking up some of that usage. But if he's traded or if he gets hurt again or something, I think there's the value on those guys is going to skyrocket once again. I do think they're both kind of being a little bit overvalued right now, just based on what they did last year. But I guess they fit as an answer to that question. Another one would be if Trae Young gets traded. There's huge opportunity there in Atlanta. Jalen Johnson obviously is going to play a huge role anyway, but I mean, we really could see him skyrocket to, I don't know, something ridiculous. Top 15, top 20. I mean, he could do everything. It's incredible. And if he turns into somewhat of a pseudo first option, I guess I should say, because he's not going to be a first option on a complete team probably. We could see his fantasy value go crazy. But Dyson Daniels and Kobe Buffkin are also going to see increased usage in the event of a Trae Young trade. And I'm personally not as high as Kobe Buffkin as some other people are, but Dyson Daniels is somebody I really like, especially if he can get some shots and actually pass the ball a little bit, get some assists. The defense is there. So and then lastly, Colin Sexton is one for me. Isaiah Collier and Keontae George are not going to be able to unleash their full potential with Colin Sexton there. Now, it seems like they really like Colin Sexton, and I hope he stays in Utah. And I'm a huge fan of Colin Sexton as the dynasty asset. But if he's gone, look for those 2 point guards, or regardless if they want to play Keontae George the 2, he's a point guard. To see increases in assists and scoring. Obviously, there's a lot of a lot of touches to go around if Sexton were to leave, and those two stand to be the biggest beneficiaries.
All right, very good. Okay, so let's move on to our next question. This is coming from our boy Colby. Shout out to Canada. Shout out to Colby. Colby asks, which league formats do you think have the best chance of lasting long term? Well, Colby, as somebody who's in every single dynasty league that I'm in, I think you know the answer to this question, and that's a real salary format dynasty league. So, what I talked about earlier with you want to make sure you're in an active dynasty league with a good communicative commissioner, that doesn't apply here because he's asking about league format. So I think the most successful format is one that incorporates the players' real salaries. And the best place for you to be able to do that is on Fantrax. So the reason why salary leagues have the best chance of lasting long-term is because they add the most parity. So when you don't have salaries attached to players, that's where you get the example Mitch brought up earlier. The Jaren Jackson, Trae Young plus Jaylen Brown for Victor Wembanyama move is 150,000% impossible to pull off in a salary league. Something like that can only happen in a non-salary league. And so people, especially savvy dynasty managers, are going to take advantage of the fact that salaries are not involved. And one thing that can happen, or it's very common in dynasty leagues that don't have salary attached, is there will be either 1 or 2 juggernaut teams that form. There's no consequence to these teams from, having a bunch of star players with high salaries, and there's no consequence to constantly shipping out their own first round picks for more, veteran players to be added on. And it's very discouraging when there is a juggernaut team in your league. Let's say you're, kind of in the middle there, you're trying to contend, but you can't really get into playoffs, and you just think to yourself, well, there's no way I'm ever going to beat that top team. It's going to take me 10 years to get anywhere close to that team. That's going to probably discourage you and make you want to leave that type of league. And that's only something that happens in a league that doesn't have salary involved. So when you have salary involved, it puts a real cap onto the types of trades that people can make. In addition to that, it adds more parity and activity in the league too. So, for example, contracts update. let's say like there's a rookie who's coming off of his rookie scale deal, he gets an extension. Well, now that owner of that person in that dynasty league needs to deal with that extension. Perhaps they have to make a trade in order to either A, offload that person because they don't want to deal with their salary, or B, offload other people so they can fit the salary that's going to be increasing for that person. So that forces action. It forces activity by having a salary in the league. The other option is custom salaries. Be careful with those because it can get pretty easy to get carried away with a whole custom salary league system. Those can be pretty complex at times. So the easiest way to do that is to just use the players' real life salaries and work with a cap and be able to go from there. Because also too, what it avoids is a team that's full of just only young players with no type of any person who produces any type of stats whatsoever on there. And so those are the teams that tank the most easily because there's nobody producing stats for them. But also those teams are going to be a long way off from being anywhere to being competitive. So when you're in a salary league, so these tanking teams are forced to have some guys that are making good money and play a lot. There's going to be tanking teams out there that got, a Ben Simmons on there and Andrew Wiggins, something like that, because they have to meet the salary minimum floor too, in addition to avoiding the salary cap.
Okay, cool.
So next question for you, Mitch. This is coming from Car Magic. Is this the year where we should take a younger star like Trae Young and Anthony Edwards over aging stars like Steph Curry and Kevin Durant in the back end of the first round for standard redraft leagues? So keep in mind, this is redraft. This is not Dynasty, which has been, our heavily focused topic today.
Yeah, thank you, Car Magic, for the shift in perspective in this mailbag. So, before we go on, I want to kind of state the 9-cat ranks of the players you mentioned over the last 4 years. Anthony Edwards being a little bit unfair because he did have his rookie year, but I just want to kind of hone in on some of the old versus new type players. Steph Curry, the last 4 years, he was a second-ranked player, seventh-ranked player, seventh-ranked player, and the 22nd-ranked player. Kevin Durant, he was 5th, 2nd, 4th, and 10th. Then you look at more of the younger guys like Anthony Edwards. I mean, discounting his rookie year, his last 3 seasons, 46, 41, 37. He improved his free throw percentage over the last year. His scoring has, been constantly increasing, but not to the point where he's, a true anchor like some of the other guys like a Joel Embiid or a Luka Doncic. And then you have a Trae Young, who is a great assist anchor with some, flaws in his game. Like field goal and lack of steals. And he ranked 38th, 11th, 40th, and 35th. So you're almost deciding the trade-off of the durability of these young guys that comes with youth or the consistent production of these aging stars like Steph Curry, Kevin Durant. They're coming off a great Olympic run for Team USA. They look very sharp. And, if there was a first team, they would definitely be on it. Personally, in my opinion, I would go with the more established talent because you can really never predict these injuries, but I can understand why you'd go with some of the younger options here in the back end of the first round. And I also do want to give an honorable mention to Anthony Davis and Joel Embiid, guys in their early 30s that have been kind of in the back end of the first round in redraft. They should definitely be picked up in the mid 6 to 9 range. But if they do fall to the 10th through the 12th range, they're definitely a steal candidate, in my opinion. I mean, if you can even classify, a steal in the first round, they would definitely be one. Just because they're constantly putting top 5 numbers and they're honestly in their prime. They're not really that old, and all things considered. And at the end of the day, you really draft the players you enjoy, because that's really what's the fun of what fantasy basketball is about. Like, I can understand the argument of Trae Young versus Steph Curry, but me personally, as a Warriors fan, I'm always going to go with Steph Curry because I want to turn on my TV, watch my favorite player, and make a push for the playoffs. And that's really what it is. The end of the first round, or the first round in general, isn't going to win or lose your redraft league. What wins your redraft league is the mid to late rounds where you identify those steals who have a high return of investment in terms of where their draft capital was. So please keep that in mind. In the first round, it's really a wash, But if I had to choose, I'd go with the more established talent.
Yeah, I think a common mistake, like heavily involved dynasty players normally still play redraft too. And sometimes it's hard to make that, to disconnect from dynasty where youth is favored when you're going into a redraft league. And sometimes people will think, no, this is the year that, Anthony Edwards is going to jump from second round to first round. Whereas in redraft, that's really not the time to be making gambles like that. You should be always going with consistency, especially at the top of your draft. And then later on is where you can try to target some of those guys where something that nobody else knows. You're gonna go for them, breaking out and providing extra value, which adds on to the consistency that's already going to be provided by the guys that you picked in your first 5 rounds. Okay, so on to our next question here. We welcomed people to also submit a recent trade that they did as part of their mailbag questions, and we'll evaluate that trade. So Braxton, our friend HBB made a trade where he is in a 30-team real salary league. It is a 9-cat rotisserie league. Or it is a dynasty as well. So he traded away Joel Embiid and Charles Bassey, and he received Lauri Markkanen and Wendell Carter Jr.
Yeah. Okay. First things first. Charles Bassey is not an asset. Period. Even in 30 teams, so that's a complete nothing burger to me. I wouldn't worry. I wouldn't factor that in at all. Now, so if we're looking at this as Embiid for Wendell Carter Jr. and Lauri Markkanen, I think it's pretty fair value on Embiid. It's tough to get decent value on him, especially in some of these deeper leagues like we all have seen. Especially in salary leagues as well, where his salary is ridiculous. Now it looks like he matched the salary. Lauri and Wendell Carter Jr. is $54 million, with Embiid and Bassey being 53.6. That's nice. Something I do wonder is, and I don't play Roto, but I don't know how much. I don't know how valuable Lauri Markkanen is in Roto. Obviously, a lot of his value comes from those I think 3 categories. Was that field goal, free throw, point? Okay, so I guess 4. But usually my understanding from Roto is you don't want guys who are incredibly weak in other categories, because it drags you down in some of those peripheral ones. I do think it's so tough to pick a side, and I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about it. But I think it's pretty dead even. Wendell Carter Jr. I don't know. I don't really know how I view him moving forward. I mean, the Magic obviously still like him. I don't know if he's necessarily like. I think it's possible that he gets outplayed by. We saw how good they were with Goga Batadze playing, starting at center last year. I think it's possible if he struggles early on that maybe he could have trouble getting on the court, because it seems like they're committed to having Mo Wagner play. But with that being said, Lauri and Wendell Carter are much more, I guess, tradable assets. So that's worth something in itself. And then also they're much more, I think, reliable from a just a games played standpoint. I know they both have had their own injury issues, but not the kind of stigma that Embiid has. So.
Right. Like everybody involved in this has their fair share of injury history. Embiid does. Lauri Markkanen had those years where he, tapped out at the end of the season just due to exhaustion. I've been burned multiple times by Wendell Carter in redraft. And so I'm going to go back to your point of, in Roto, you really don't want to be bad in any category. Like in regular standard 9-cat, that's where we, punt a specific category or two where we don't care about them, and we want to focus on being ultra strong in other specific categories. But in Roto, that's not the case. That's actually the only time where you're really trying to be as balanced as you can. And I think the one thing that makes me lean towards the Embiid side is defense, because Lauri Markkanen doesn't have much defense, and neither does Carter either. I think them two combined isn't probably going to be super comparable to what Embiid does defensive wise. So Embiid plus whoever else is going to be squeezed in on the end of your roster. Like, let's just think of a random veteran name here, like Dorian Finney-Smith or Royce O'Neal. I think either of them paired with Embiid is probably more productive than Markkanen and Carter paired together if we're talking a Roto league.
I will add, I think this is a pretty decent package for Embiid, though. I think we've seen him go for less. And I think if you're going to be trading Embiid, I think this is a solid return for him.
True.
So.
There's definitely a stigma against Embiid in Dynasty where some guys are just not willing to fork over that much for Embiid. Like, I think,
right.
I think, especially in a salary league, I think there might be some people that actually prefer like somebody like Anthony Davis as opposed to Embiid.
Yeah, Embiid really has that kind of stink to him that no one wants to really touch. But if you put all bias aside, Lauri Markkanen is what, making over 40 mil a year now. I know Embiid had that final, 3-year extension that goes on until he's like 36 years old, but they're relatively the same age right now, and that doesn't kick in within the next 2 years. So, if you're contending, you're getting a lot better cost per production than Lauri Markkanen at this point, and they both really have those injury concerns as well. And Brax, I know you mentioned Wendell is kind of an ambiguous asset at this point, and I definitely tend to agree. We don't really know the direction he's going to take on the Magic, which is why I think I lean the Joel Embiid side, although there is that stigma against him because of his attitude, his injury concerns and how he's a dirty player or whatnot. But that really doesn't matter. Well, injuries do matter, but in terms of comparing Laurie and Embiid, they're relatively the same in terms of games played the last 4 seasons, which is why I have to kind of side with the Embiid one right over here.
Right. But back to Brax's point, though. I mean, if you are going to trade Embiid, then this is a pretty good job done by HBB here. I've definitely seen some guys concede way more value in regards to trading away Joel Embiid than in this situation here. All right, so that brings us to our final question, and this is coming from our old pal T-Choi. So T-Choi wants to know why we have Jabari Smith ranked so high. So I'm assuming he is speaking about our Dynasty rankings, where we have, in our latest update, which can be found on our website, we have Jabari Smith at number 50. So Jabari Smith is 21 years old, 21.4 to be exact. So that's about 6 months older than Jalen Duren. That's about 3 years younger than Keegan Murray. This is somebody who was a top 3 pick. This is somebody who broke into the top 100 last year in a 9-cat ranking. So per Basketball Monster, Jabari Smith ended up at 87. He has a very well-rounded 9-category game. And I think especially for somebody who can be and is deployed as a small ball center, he has an impressive amount of rebounds. 8.1 rebounds a game is very, very good for somebody who, might be a little bit undersized for the center position. Somebody like Jaren Jackson Jr. is not pulling down that amount of boards. So that really goes a long way for somebody who can pull down that many boards in addition to make almost 2 3-pointers per game. And what we really want to see come along for Jabari is the defense. So he's a bit under 1 steal per game and 1 block per game as well. So he's at 0.7 steals and 0.8 blocks. He played 76 games last year. He is durable. And what I really focus on here, which is why I rated Jabari so high. So let's see, for personal rank, I mean, we all must have rated him this high for him to end up at 50. So yeah, 52 for me, 52 for Brax, 48 for Mitch. That's perfectly fine. That's all relatively within a tight window of each other. We all value Jabari Smith here the same way. And I think the biggest reason for that is his flexibility. Yes, the Rockets are still trying to figure out their true identity. I'm 100% confident that no matter what direction the Rockets franchise goes with their overall offensive scheme and what they want to do, Jabari Smith is going to fit into that. Whether if it's going to be fully focused on building the team around Şengün, Jabari Smith has to play with Şengün. He's the person that bails out Şengün's shortcomings defensively. Or if he's going to be, the main center and they're going to run a different unit of guys out there with the Rockets, Jabari Smith still fits. He still is going to produce at a good rate. So no matter what the Rockets do, Jabari Smith's going to be involved. I am not worried in any way about somebody coming for Jabari Smith's job in Houston. What do you guys think about that?
I'll go first. So as someone that has Jabari in 1 or 2 leagues, like to your point, I really love his positional flexibility. He gives you that forward center combination that's really coveted in a lot of, dynasty circles. But, let's say he extends his usage by 2%. Let's say Fred VanVleet kind of defers a bit in the ball handling and the self-creation. Jabari gets a little bit more reps on ball. If that happens, let's say Jabari goes up to 16 or 17 points per game, 9 rebounds, 2 assists. Maybe he gets those 1 steal, 1 block. That's a top 40 player, and he's only 21 years old of age. So, a lot of potential. I kind of see, and we talked about this, Andrew, as Jabari Smith is kind of like a Chris Bosh light or like a Rashard Lewis who can really hit those threes for you. He doesn't entirely kill you on the percentages for someone who shoots that many threes, but he also helps you with free throws, shooting over 80% a game this past year. So if he ever picks up those stocks and gets a little bit more usage, why shouldn't we have someone who's top 50, who's also very, very young in his career?
I mean, and just to add on to what you guys were saying, I mean, he's only 21, and I don't know if it's because he's viewed as somewhat of a boring asset for some reason, but we saw huge jumps in literally every category last year, including his turnovers going down, and his personal fouls per game going down as well. I mean, he improved in every single facet of his game statistically, and with only one more minute per game. He's incredibly durable. He's only missing a couple of games per season, and he's a huge part of what Houston wants to do moving forward. Again, like you said, he's 21. That's only 1 year older than Reed Shepherd is right now, right? And Reed Shepherd is being heralded in some circles as like a top 20, top 25 asset. Not here, but in some places he is, right? So to me, I view it as people just kind of viewing him as relatively low upside for some reason. Maybe he's a little more boring. He's been around for a couple of years. He's not the shiny new toy, but I think Mitch, if he hits all the points that you said, he could be primed for a big breakout here. And even if he doesn't, he's a pretty elite asset. He can stick around as a rock solid contributor in both redraft and as a top end asset in deeper. He could be a major part of your team in deeper dynasty leagues and still be successful.
With that being said, Andrew, let me trade you Jabari Smith for Scoot Henderson real quick.
I've had a feeling that this was coming. Well, I've been offered a Jabari Smith plus combo for Scoot Henderson from Mitch a few times.
You should do it. Scoot is terrible. You should do it.
I knew I should not ask you, Brax, because you would have that exact that exact opinion. But you know what? Let's leave that to the listeners. Leave a comment down below. Would you rather have Jabari Smith plus a little bit extra, or in this little bit extra, Mitch is offering one of my personal favorite stashes for this year, AJ Mitchell. So tempting. Or would you rather have Scoot Henderson? So I've had Scoot Henderson since the beginning of last year. I drafted him in the rookie draft of that league at, I think it was at number 2. I either had number 2 or number 3, one of those. But anyways, 2. I drafted Scoot Henderson, held on. And so I don't want to be the person who misses the boat when everything does click for Scoot Henderson.
You've missed it. You've missed
if he doesn't, I do have the ability to get bailed out at some point for Jabari Smith. So it has been something that I've been wrestling with, especially because Mitch is dangling that AJ Mitchell chip in front of me too, which he knows damn well that that's kind of working too. So it's something that's been in the back of my mind, but I know at the same time that Mitch is a good dynasty manager and he wants Scoot for a reason. So it's something I've been struggling with. So let's see if we get any comments on that. Who would you rather go with moving forward in a dynasty league? Jabari Smith was a little bit extra, or Scoot Henderson. All right, so that takes care of all of our questions in the mailbag today. If you want to participate in a future mailbag, join our Discord channel. We're going to leave the link in the comment section below. Be sure to, or in the video description, I should say. Be sure to check that out. Join our Discord channel. It's a very active community. We have a lot going on in there, as well as a lot of updates of what's going on with the Angle Dynasty League. And that's going to be our next video, is covering some trades that have gone down in the Angle Dynasty League. We've had so many trades go down that we're going to have to probably make that one a 2-parter. Covering some trades. We're going to bring on different guys from the league too. So, you don't have to be an analyst to make it on to the Angle Fantasy Basketball podcast. If you're active, you're in our league, we'll have you on to talk about some dynasty basketball. So thank you guys, everybody, for tuning in today. Be sure to follow us on Twitter. Check out our website. Again, anglefantasybasketball.wordpress.com. Everything that we post is going to be on there. See you later, everybody.
Captain, always gotta look for him. Beat so tight, I almost put a hook on it. Verse so fire, I almost put a cook on it. Had this shit jumping, looking like I put a foot on it. Got 100 on the dash when I book Sonic. Only game that I play, got a rook on it. Got a flow so hard that it looks solid. Y'all be cynical.